2 weeks have passed since working-level talks between North Korea and the U.S. took place in Sweden, but we've seen little development since then. Instead, North Korea continues to step up harsh rhetoric against the U.S. and calling for strengthened self-reliance. Most recently, it claimed that Washington is using sanctions to pressure disobedient countries and that it will stand up to such attempts. Today, we go in-depth into what stands in the way of resuming the talks between the two sides. For that, Dr. Jung-yeop from the Sejong Institute joins me in the studio today. Great to see you.
Thanks for having me.
So North Korea continues to criticize the U.S. following the breakdown of talks in Sweden. While we haven't seen any significant developments, recently North Korean leader Kim Jong-un visited Mount Baekdu, and Kim has often visited there ahead of making major diplomatic or political decisions. So there's speculation is mounting that a major announcement could be forthcoming. What is your assessment of the current situation?
So in the past, Kim Jong-un has visited the mountain Baekdu when he was about to announce like big things in his national policy or foreign policy. And also his grandfather, Kim Il-sung, used the horse riding when he wanted to show something to his people. But I just came back from the Washington, D.C. Visiting last week, and this picture was like really mocked by many U.S. people that they said that it was amazing that there's some countries still use this kind of picture for the propaganda purpose. So we don't know yet whether the intention of using this horse ride picture is for like domestic audiences or the international audiences. But regardless of what is coming after this picture, that it is not really well received in the international community.
So we saw him on a white stallion. Earlier today, North Korea state newspaper said that the U.S. was using sanctions in order to pressure disobedient countries to their knees. Now, it also said the sanctions being brought by the Western powers are serving as a major obstacle in global peace and stability. And the regime keeps continuing for self-reliance. Do you think this is to show discontent over the breakdown of talks? What do you think the North's intentions are?
So first of all, even though North Korea has shown some resilience, even though there are harsh sanctions imposed on the North Korean economy, but there's a problem in North Korean economy indeed. So North Korean government has to tell their people that this kind of like harsh economic condition was imposed by like Western countries, especially the United States. So there's no real near prospect for lifting sanctions by international community. North Korean government has to tell their people that because of U.S. sanctions, that this kind of economic hardship is going to continue, and it's not because of North Korean government faults. So I think that if North Korea cannot reach any agreement with the United States soon for the relieving sanctions, then this kind of message from North Korean government is going to continue.
The U.S. has decided to extend its blacklisting of North Korea for human trafficking record, banning non-humanitarian as well as non-trade related assistance to the regime. Now, the measures against Pyongyang is nothing new, but given that they haven't been able to set a new date for working-level talks, do you think it's going to be hard to find common ground for them to meet again? What sort of response do you see coming from North Korea after this decision?
So even though there has been many expectations about the working level meetings in Sweden, but it ended without having any meaningful result. So I think that U.S. is trying to give more pressure to North Korea for North Korea to come back to the negotiating table, because the United States believe that it is the sanctions, international sanctions, that brings North Korea back to the negotiations and stopped them from doing more like provocations. So I think that the United States is going to continue put more pressures, even though it's going to be very difficult for U.S. to get cooperation from China and Russia in the UN Security Council. So the unilateral sanctions by United States is going to continue. And North Korea, as we have observed already, that are going to continue their dissentiment about these kind of sanctions by the United States.
So we're going to see this situation last for a little bit more. According to a local media report, the U.S. apparently proposed a plan to help North Korea construct one of its tourist areas in return for denuclearization during the talks in Stockholm. And now that was the Kalma tourist area, something that Kim Jong-un has also been pushing for himself. What do you think this plan entailed, and what can you tell us about this tourist area?
Yes, before the meeting in Sweden, there were like a couple of newspaper reports and news reports about what can be offered, what could be offered by the U.S. government, and what could be offered by the North Korean government. But as far as I can tell, then I talked to someone who's very close to the meeting in Sweden that nothing has been like really talked in that level, because North Korea is in their like receiving mode in the talks. So they listens what the United States could offer to the North Korea, and North Korea and the United States could not reach that point to discuss the details. So these kind of details before and after reported in the medias are not really correct. So the U.S. gave some like bright future pictures that has been discussed all the time since the Singapore last year, but that it is very obvious that what North Korea wants is not a like partial deal. They want to lift off meaningful sanctions, which is that lifting all the sanctions in their like civilian economies. And from the United States point of view, that it's impossible for them to relieve all the sanctions before they can verify some kind of meaningful denuclearization measures from North Korean side. So I think that there are many like false reports. However, we have to think that the United States and North Korea has to continue dialogue to find a common ground.
So the problem has always been sanctions relief for denuclearization steps. Now it's been 2 weeks since the Stockholm talks came to a close without a deal, and Stockholm authorities said that they should resume talks within the next 2 weeks, but obviously this hasn't happened. While some reports say there's still some closed-door action going on between the two, there must be some kind of justification or pretext for the two sides to get together again. How do you see this going?
So we don't know yet, and the U.S. government has not known yet whether the move by North Korea in Sweden was whether tactical or like strategic. When they meant tactical, it means that North Korea wants to enhance their position in the negotiation by abruptly discontinuing the talks at Sweden in a hope that they can enhance their position. When the U.S. meant strategic, that means that North Korea might not be interested in the talks anymore, because there is nothing much they can get from the working level talks with the United States. So before the working level negotiations at Sweden, that there are expectations that North Korea is shifting from sanctions relief to the security guarantee, but security guarantee was not even discussed at the Sweden this time. So we don't know what kind of directions that North Korea is pursuing right now. So U.S. is hoping that the move North Korea shows at Sweden is tactical. So there can be another round of working level negotiations. But we have to see whether that move in Sweden by North Korea is tactical or strategic. So we have to see.
So you mentioned security guarantees, and earlier, recently, the U.S. expressed willingness to discuss the issue of North Korea's security guarantees following the Stockholm talks, and that was from Devin Stilwell, the U.S. Assistant Secretary for State for East Asian and Pacific Affairs. How do you see this? Do you think this will be coming up in future working level talks?
So it is because that the United States is not willing to relieve any sanctions upfront as North Korea has demanded. That is why the U.S. government and Assistant Secretary Stilwell mentioned during the hearing at the Senate that U.S. is willing to discuss anything if North Korea wants. So I think it doesn't, what Mr. Stilwell mentioned during the hearing does not not mean that that's what North Korea demanded during the recent negotiation with the United States, but it's just merely showing that U.S. willingness to engage North Korea in every aspect that North Korea wanted.
So you said you recently visited the U.S. Did you get any idea of how they viewed the recent working level talks with North Korea?
So actually there are a lot of frustrations from U.S. side because it's not only that there's no progress, but U.S. sees some kind of unwillingness in North Korean side in terms of pursuing the working level negotiations. So maybe North Korea is going to pursue another summit between Trump and Kim, but U.S. is not really excited about that idea. So there's a lot of frustration from the U.S. side.
So do you think North Korea is still interested in top-down negotiations?
I think that's the only way they believe that they can get some benefits from talks with the United States, because working level negotiations is not moving in the direction toward their benefits. So probably maybe sometime soon that we are going to see another beautiful letter from Kim Jong-un to Trump.
So North Korean leader had said until the year's end for the U.S. to make some sort of big decision, but we don't have that much time left. If we shift gears to South Korean-U.S. issues, the two sides are set to kick off another round of talks on the cost sharing of the American troops stationed on the Korean peninsula. Now, the U.S. reportedly wants a massive increase, with some reports saying that Washington is expected to ask Seoul to pay about $5 billion US. Now, this year, South Korea is required to pay about $870 million, so a big increase. Why do you think the big hefty hike?
So the $5 billion, that figure just came from President Trump, and he really didn't care about how South Korea could pay $5 billion, because now even if South Korean government is willing to increase, there's a limitations because of the current agreement between the United States and Korea. So now South Korean government is paying for like salaries for the workers in the USFK bases and the construction fees and some support for the United States. So even if South Korea is wanting to increase, it can barely over like $1 billion. So there are still like $4 billion gap. Whether President Trump is really shooting for $5 billion, we don't know yet. But in terms of like huge increase, we have to add another category other than the three categories that we are now paying to for the United States. So whether South Korean government and the U.S. can agree on adding another category for South Korea to pay much more than before is going to be the key and hot issue between two countries.
So South Korea's negotiating team heads to Hawaii tomorrow for these talks, and we're expecting a fierce debate between the two sides, given that there's still an enormous gap on the issue. What are your prospects for the talks, and what are the key sticking points?
So now we have a little over than 2 months to reach an agreement. If we cannot agree on the agreement, then there's a clause in the last year's agreement that if two sides agree, that there can be 1 year extension. But President Trump has to agree on the extension. But it is unclear whether President Trump is going to be satisfied with the 1 year extension at the current level, less than $1 million. So I think the U.S. government is going to push that South Korea needs to pay more by adding another category at the current special measures agreement. So that's going to be the key issue between two countries in Hawaii next week.
Just a key question before we let you go. Because they have to cooperate on the North Korean issue, do you think this will be a factor in any way for these cost-sharing talks?
So because of that North Korea issue is linked to all the alliance issues at this time, that South Korean government does not really want to antagonize the U.S. government, especially President Trump, on this issue. However, as I just mentioned, that even though South Korean government is willing to pay more, there's a law that there's a limit. So two countries has to find a way to add more categories for South Korea to pay more to the United States, and that it will be very difficult.
Okay, so this is something that we should be keeping an eye out for a look this week. Thank you for your insights.
Thank you.